Welcome to Rich Planets TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. On today's show we have a serving police detective who is also a UFO researcher. He spoke recently at the UK Exopolitics conference in Leeds and is soon to be speaking on a lecture tour in Denmark for the Danish Exopolitics group. We are here in West Yorkshire in late October and we've decided to brave the weather and come outside and conduct the interview here. So welcome, Gary.
Good morning to you.
Now then, I mentioned there the Exopolitics conference at which we both spoke in August 2011. Now, your talk was all about the Rendlesham Forest incident, which we spoke about last time. Can you, first off, because we're going to discuss a little bit of the politics behind the Rendlesham case, because there's quite a lot of...
And there are a lot of politics.
Firstly, can you give us the salient points, as briefly as you can, the timeline of events and who the key witnesses were?
Okay. Basically, after 4 years of research, having met Colonel Holt, who was then the deputy base commander of the base in 1980 when the incidents occurred, I've collaborated with him and I've done an evidential review, and that's what my talk was, basically through police eyes and evidential review. The key salient points of that we can establish after 30 years is that there were 3 successive nights of UFO activity. On the first night, principally, there was a UFO seen that was then tracked through the forest and then was seen to be on the ground, i.e. a landed UFO. 2 officers approached that craft, one of which actually touched it, which was Sergeant Jim Penniston, and he made numerous drawings, was around the craft for many minutes, detailed drawings. The second significant night is less well known, but I'm now happy to believe that that is corroborated. A number of officers have come forward in the last 2 or 3 years to corroborate that the second night occurs, and this involves in a Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who was out on mobile patrol when she has an encounter with a UFO, which is so frightening to her that she has to be relieved from duty and take time off. The third night is perhaps the most famous night, because this is the night that involves Colonel Holt, where the UFOs return and he takes a team of specialist officers out with him. They track UFO through the forest, where it then divides into 5 more silent UFOs that disappear. Then multiple UFOs are seen off the base, near the base, and eventually UFOs shine a beam down at their feet, the group of 5 airmen, including Holt, before one of the UFOs is then later seen and corroborated via other people in the radar in the weapon storage tower, that beams were being shone directly into the weapon storage area, which I can confirm is a nuclear storage facility.
Right. Now, recently I saw a new UFO film by Leslie Keane, I think it is, and Holt gave his testimony in that film, and he actually drew a picture of the UFO that he witnessed, which was different to what Penniston witnessed.
Absolutely.
Now, I think you can get that on the net. I think it's called Secret Access UFOs. Very good documentary if you want to look that one up. Now, okay, when we were at this Exopolitics conference, you gave your talk on Rendlesham, all of the evidence, etc., etc., and then I think it was just after your talk, someone taps me on the shoulder and hands me a copy of the Daily Telegraph, and there's a big article all about Rendlesham. The commander of the base, i.e. Holt's boss,
Ted Conrad,
has come forward, and he's making statements, basically negative statements, I guess, not having spoken publicly about this event for, how long is it, 41 years?
30 years.
30 years. And that was quite a coincidence that it was at the same time as the Exopolitics conference. But tell us what was said in that article and what your reaction to it was?
Well, basically, I was surprised, although nothing surprises me in the UFO world and the way the media portray this subject after 9 years of research.
Yeah.
But basically, he did a very negative article saying that after 31 years, he'd finally agreed to speak, and basically he said there was nothing to it, and kind of like just trivialised what went on. He said that something went on, but he didn't really think it'd amount to anything. He didn't really say anything of note, it was just generalisations. Well, that obviously made a lot of newspapers, and in fact it pretty much makes all the newspapers. Anything to do with Rendlesham that is of a negative angle seems to just go around the internet and on newspaper websites like wildfire. But actually the best evidence about Rendlesham rarely ever gets a mention, and there's an irony there which I think we'll touch on a bit later. But just to clear up the matter, I know from my collaboration with Colonel Holt that actually Ted Conrad, his memory perhaps is somewhat a bit elusive, because it was actually Ted Conrad that was there on the same night, the Christmas party, when Holt is told that the UFO's back. Well, Ted Conrad was there when that was told, my Bruce, Lieutenant Bruce England. And it was actually Conrad who said to Holt, I want you to go out and sort this out once and for all. So he was the one who actually instructed Holt to go out and assemble a team and get out there. But interestingly, from Colonel Holt, he says that there was a chat with a Major Ziegler, who was the head of the security police aspect, and the Office of Special Investigations, which is like the CID of the US Air Force Police. And he was actually involved in a conversation with Conrad, who then approaches Holt and says, we would like you to take Sergeant Ball with you as well. And Holt says, okay.
Right.
So it would strike me that Ted Conrad's recollections perhaps are not quite as accurate as they could be.
Right. Now, why would he suddenly make a statement not having spoken out for all this time? I mean, they've clearly dragged him out of retirement to make this statement. I mean, have you spoke to Holt about it, and what does Holt think about it?
Well, I have spoken to Holt about it, and he has his own thoughts, which he, I think, went to great lengths to address at the time, to actually counter what he'd said, and he more or less said what I've said, that he's got a short memory. But I think that's better for Holt to say it. Suffice to say that we both are of the opinion that for some reason, I don't think it's particularly a coincidence that Conrad came out with his comments just at the time when I am actually making an evidential review through my experience as a police officer, showing you the best evidence. It seems more than a coincidence to me that suddenly we have something negative to counter the positive aspect that I'm portraying to the subject.
One of the ways that mainstream has tried to explain Rendlesham is that all of these airmen, and I think there were over 50, witnessed lights, 3 of whom witnessed it at close quarters, and then there was airmen witnessed other UFOs on different nights, that they were witnessing a lighthouse. Now, there was a very good slide that you had in your talk, I remember, where you gave all of the different reasons why it can't be a lighthouse. Can you just, for the benefit of the viewer, just go through that list, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who actually looks at the case in any depth and looks at the testimony and what is out there and what people have said consistently on camera since it became public in the early 80s, is that the debunkers have always said it's a lighthouse. And this is where you get into this very murky area of media manipulation. Because I do, after 9 years of research, I do have to conclude that there is definitely a negative bias towards UFOs in the media. If we can trivialise it, let's write a piece trivialising it. Rarely does consistent investigative reporting be done on factual events. Now, a case in point is when we talk about the lighthouse theory, there must have been probably 30 or 40 major television documentaries made during the last 26 years since it became public, really in 83 onwards. And virtually in every one, the programmers are given a lot of time to the lighthouse theory that was expanded very early on by certain negative skeptics who didn't actually, to my mind, look at the actual evidence of what people said.
And you're a serving detective, so
I should know what evidence is. And so I think that when I look at evidence, I'm looking at it through police eyes on what is evidential. The fact that I have pro-UFO views is regardless. I can take myself out of that and look at and call it as it is, whether it's a piece of evidence that stands up or not. And that's what I have done to the Rendlesham case. And what I do plan to do at some point is to send all of the evidential review in a more detailed form to all the national newspapers and TV. But that's another issue. But in addressing this particular point, you have to look at the testimony of the people that were there and what is there. Now, the skeptics talk in generalisations. That's the classic thing that Stanton Friedman's been saying for many, many years. And it's absolutely true that the, as he would call it, the noisy negativists come out with stories that are never, ever countenanced or challenged, because the media don't have a Jeremy Paxman type figure who knows what's what about the subject to actually say, well, actually, you're wrong about that. You said that in that year. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of referee that will arbit for us. But in the lighthouse theory, there are certain points that I wanted to make at the lecture. So I think it's useful now. I'm going to read out, I think there's 13 or 14 points as to why it can't be the lighthouse. And this is based on the actual evidence of the case. The first one, does Penniston, which is Sergeant Penniston, and John Burrows, the airman officer with him, does their descriptions of the landed object match the lighthouse? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the moving lights seen from multiple witnesses from the east gate on the first night? No. Does the lighthouse explain the aerial objects seen by Penniston and Burrows as they walked back to the base, i.e. in the opposite direction of the lighthouse? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen moving over the trees and later descending into them by various officers on the second night? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen by Lieutenant Bonnie Ray Tamplin on the second night that so frightened her that she had to be taken from duty? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the landing indentations found by Burrows and Penniston on the first night? No. Does the lighthouse explain the increased radiation levels found at the landing site? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen by Holt and his team that was low to the ground on the left side of the farmhouse across the farmer's field? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how the same object silently divided into 5 different objects as described by Holt and his team of men? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how later on multiple objects, i.e. 5, were seen in groups north and south of the base where Holt's team were? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how one of those objects moved from the south to hover directly above Holt's team and cast down what can only be described as a laser beam type of light at their feet just inches from them? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how Holt and his team witness an object over the base casting a beam down to the ground when it's seen in the opposite direction to the lighthouse? Answer, no. And finally, does the lighthouse explain the clear movements as described by Holt on his dictaphone recording of the live event as it actually happened? Answer, no.
Right. Can I add one, Gary?
Yeah, go on.
Is the BBC talking shit on its website when it tries to pass the UFO off as a lighthouse?
Absolutely.
Answer,
ludicrous.
Yes.
Yes. You know, and that is not me being clever.
Yeah.
That's just me applying what has evidentially been said by multiple people that corroborate each other of the events. Now, you don't need to be a genius to do this. But where I think we have to draw attention to this is that investigative journalists and documentary teams that should be able to think of those same points if they actually look at the evidence properly, why none of those have ever brought those points onto screen in any major documentary in the last 27 years.
Now, this Conrad guy, who was the head of the base, presumably he must have been asked to take part in some of these documentaries and presumably has said no.
Well, I can't speak for him, but as I'm led to believe, he's never really given any kind of major interview about it, and I just find it incredibly coincidental that he should make this comment so many years after the event, 31 years in fact, when it coincides with a major UFO conference in Leeds where I'm about to give what is perhaps the most key evidential review so far.
And we've had other articles with other debunking theories.
Absolutely.
There was the manure truck story.
Kevin Cond and the police car roving around in the forest.
Manure truck on fire, that was the UFO.
The manure. I mean,
yeah.
but this is absolutely classic. And I think we will touch on later an article that was printed in the Sun, which I've got a copy of, so I want to be accurate on what I'm saying, where it clearly illustrates to me how there is a dumbing down of this subject.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about the Sun and the article that that was published in the Sun about the Exopolitics
the day after
conference.
the conference finished.
But before we go to the break, Gary, and before we talk about that article in the Sun, let's just touch on some of the other speakers that were at the Exopolitics conference.
Yep.
Because, you know, there were, I think, something like 18 speakers or something like that. There was a lot of speakers.
3 days, full days.
3 full days of lectures on the UFO and related subjects. I mean, there was a couple there, a Muslim couple, the wife who had an abduction experience, and there's actually footage, alleged footage of her basically disappearing from the bed. I mean, you know, to give a snapshot of that conference, we had Robbie Graham, who was talking about basically the Hollywood's manipulation and the CIA's involvement of you know, films, and the fact that they change the scripts in films that portray
when it's UFO related.
When it's UFO related.
Yeah. Richard Dolan talking about After Disclosure. Bryce Seibel, who's with him, have written a new book called After Disclosure, AD Disclosure.
Yeah. Stephen Bassett, who's leading the
Exopolitic movement.
Yeah, the campaign.
It goes all around the world, the campaign to raise
disclosure.
The awareness.
Yeah. Ian Crane, who's the guy with a chap called Max Burns, who's investigated the Sheffield UFO incident. So the Exopolitics conference, it's in the UK, started 2 years ago. So this was the third one. I've been to all 3 of them, and you know, they've grown. It's grown every year. So I think there were 300 people at the latest one.
Yeah.
So it has become the UK's biggest UFO conference
for many years, since Graham Birdsall used to do his with UFO magazine, but sadly he passed away and that lapsed. But now Anthony's doing a fantastic job in resurrecting the conference at Leeds, and it's getting bigger and better every year.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Gary, we're going to go for a short break, and we'll be talking about the Sun after this.